Last time, for part 1, Matt and I had a conversation about Americanism and Christianity and our series, How Then Shall We Live? And this is now part 2 of that conversation. Okay, so let's back up to last summer.
Okay.
On top of being cooped up in our homes, businesses being closed, people had lost their jobs. We had the unrest, the riots, the violence, the protests. Seemingly, it was for weeks. I don't know, it seemed like it was for months maybe in some parts of the U.S. And first of all, I want to talk about the protests themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Can we do a peaceful protest? We have the right as Americans, remember that rights thing, we're going to get into some of those. We have the right as Americans to protest.
Mm-hmm.
But should we?
Mm-hmm.
And where does that protest thing line up with the Bible?
Good question. And I'll talk about this weekend. It's hard to be an American and to be a Christian. And one of the reasons it's hard to be an American and to be a Christian is because as an American, I have certain fundamental rights. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For fun, the other night, I read the Declaration of Independence and
the Constitution.
And the Constitution. And the Bill of Rights. I read those things. And nowhere in there would I say that there is a biblical right that we have. You might say, well, isn't that a biblical right? And what does Jesus say? He who seeks to save his life will lose it. He who loses his life for my sake is the one who will find it, right? That the Bible often talks about giving up our preferences, of putting down our rights, of considering others as more important than ourselves. Those are not American ideals. Those, in fact, the American way is always winning, always being right. Nobody can tell us what to do. Nobody can take away our rights, right? I'll say that this weekend. We even have the right to get a hamburger the way we want it, right? As at least the commercial says that. You can have it your way. That's right. So we have rights that we cannot, and if anybody wants to take them away, we are up in arms. We are in a political system. We're under a rule of government that allows First Amendment, the right to a lawful or peaceful assembly. And so, as an American citizen, if you want to exercise that right to do a lawful, peaceful assembly, that's part of your citizenship. I would say, though, if you're going to do that, there should be no doubt you're a Christian when you do that. Now, I'm not saying you have to wear the big, I love Jesus t-shirt or what would Jesus do, bracelets and all that stuff. You don't have to carry the Christian flag and wave it everywhere you're going. But it should be obvious from the way you conduct yourself, that person's a Christian. It should be obvious from the way that you're speaking to the other folks in the crowd. And especially to those who disagree with you. It should be obvious that you're a Christian. There should be no doubt in their mind. And if you can do that, and bring honor to the Lord when you do it, then by all means do it. But if you can't, don't.
Do you think there's a better reasons than others to protest? Or there's some things maybe you shouldn't protest? Or what would you say to that?
Yeah, so the whole protest thing, again, the right to assembly is something that's given as part of our citizenship. That's kind of within, again, our rights as those who live in this country. But I would say that, most places in the world, there's not that feeling of it's got to be my way, or I've got to change it. There's an acceptance that sometimes it doesn't go my way. And when it doesn't go my way, what I should do is pray about it and look for, okay, well, life's a different way, and so I've got to go that. As Americans, here's one of the things that we run into is this whole rights thing and this whole entitlement thing is so strong that we really feel like if things aren't going our way, then we have to get up and we have to change it. We have to do something about it, right? We can't allow things to go. And again, I'll go back to the illusion of control. We have the illusion that we are in control of the government, that we can change it the way we want it. It's going to do the things that we want it to do. Reality is, if we do that and the government was run just the way we wanted it to be, or if the way I wanted it, you may not like that. And so then you protest because you don't like the way it's run by me. And then Scott protests because he doesn't like the way it's run by you. And then Cheryl says, "Oh, well, I'm Canadian, so it doesn't matter," right? Yeah. But it's but the reality is, we've got a and we'll get to. I guess we'll get to this.
Oh, we will.
Okay, so I won't go too far into it. But anyway, we just all right. Let's go to the next question.
So we had talked a few weeks ago about the protesting and everything, and you had talked to me about protesting for the oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems like a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's people that can't defend themselves. So it talks about oppressed people in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So are the oppressed people that we're thinking are oppressed today the same people that are oppressed? Or is it a different definition of the word oppressed? I mean, this could be a hot topic right here what I'm getting into.
So let me kind of maybe correct a little bit. I would say defend the rights of.
Okay.
Let me say defend the rights instead of protest.
Okay.
And so I would say from a biblical standpoint, who are the oppressed? And it's your widows and it's your orphans, it's the poor, it's the ones that have been outcast in society, it's those who are on the fringes. And that as believers, we're always to be on the hunt for someone to bless and someone to come alongside and to help and to meet needs and stuff. And so in our society, if we were to say who are the poor or who are the oppressed, there are groups of folks that fit that category. I think we have to be careful because I do think there is a more of a modern idea of oppression that is different than a biblical idea. So if from a biblical standpoint, these are folks that don't have access, that are on the outside, they're on the fringes, that really are, their life depends on God, right? So the widow, the orphan, the poor, they're the ones that are crying out to God for help. And God sends his people to be the ones to minister to their needs and stuff. In our society, a lot of times, I think we see the oppressed as the ones that don't have as much as we do, that don't have somehow, their life doesn't look like our life, so that means that somehow they're less than. And I think in cases where there is true oppression, where there are things that are going on that are keeping them on the outside, they're not able to. And again, from a biblical standpoint, it's even survive, right? There's those things that are pushing them out. So let me just give an example. Abortion. I will tell you, an oppressed people would be the unborn babies. That's someone that you should be fighting for. I would say if you looked at our homeless population here in the Antelope Valley, but folks who have, for whatever reason, most of them are Army vets or military veterans who, because of psychological or mental disorders or whatever, find themselves on the street. Those are oppressed. Those are folks that you need to be helping out with. We have an epidemic of foster families and kids who are orphaned from a young age, whether that's because something happened to their parents, because their parents got involved in drugs, because their parents decided just to leave them alone, or because of abuse. That would be an example of oppression in our nation right now. But those are things, again, I would say go along the lines of what the Bible talks about, the oppressed people and coming alongside them.
Okay, thank you. That's pretty clear. So that brings me to our next topic. to go along with the protest of last summer.
Mm-hmm.
And to make matters worse, besides buildings physically burning on the streets and from the violence, we had hatred running amok on social media platforms. And many of the arguments were over critical race theory and or intersectionality, along that topic. And love it or hate it, social media is part of our culture now.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I have talked about this many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do? How do we utilize it to our best capabilities? Use it for good? How do we avoid fights, conflicts, and I mean, it was a mess on some of those things last summer.
Let's see, how does Paul, let me get into that. Bless those who curse you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God. Never do what is evil in the sight of any man, but always do what is right in the sight of all men. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. I don't know how else to say it.
See, there is an advantage of having your workout partner being like a walking encyclopedia and Bible memorization. So I like to ask questions like this because these are sometimes the answers that I get, and it's like, it's pretty forthcoming and to the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say if you can't, again, if you're on social media and it's not obvious that you're a believer, and again, you're not going, hey, I'm so-and-so and I'm a Christian, and then you're blasting somebody underneath that. But if it's not obvious from the way that you're speaking and the way that you're interacting with folks that you are a believer, if that's not coming through that you love them and that your highest concern is for their good, if that's not coming through on social media, get off of it. You shouldn't be on it. And if you're going to get angry when they blast you, here's the thing. We do not live in a Christian culture. It's not Christian at all. And so if you have the expectation that somehow it's going to be Christian, or you can fix it and you can make it Christian by your little pithy saying or whatever, you're not going to do it. It's not going to happen. You're just going to be frustrated. And then you're going to end up firing back. So
okay,
stay off.
That kind of segues into what you just said about our culture. So we're going to change gears a little bit, but kind of sliding into this path. So why is it so hard to be a Christian in America or an American Christian? So I don't see an example of a democratic republic or a constitution in the Bible. Mm-hmm. Things just weren't the same back then as they are now. Mm-hmm. Are they? Or speak on that a little bit.
Okay. So there's lots of different paths we can go down. And so if I don't go down the path that you're looking for, then just tell me we'll go down a different path.
Okay.
So, and I'll say that this is Sunday. When you were a little boy growing up in the United States, you were told that you could be whatever you wanted to be. You could do whatever you wanted to do. Whatever you could dream, you could achieve it. If you wanted to be an astronaut, you could be an astronaut. If you want to be the president of the United States, you could be the president of the United States. That you could be a police officer, you could be a fireman, you could be a doctor, a lawyer, a nuclear physicist, you could be a teacher or a coach, you could be a professional athlete. You could be the next big music sensation. You could be a Hollywood actor. You could do anything you want if you just put your mind to it and you work hard enough. That's what it means to be an American. We also, like I said, we have this thing called rights. And so life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that's kind of our fundamental thing. We have a right to prosperity in this country. We have a right to win, and that's what we like to do. Truth is relative. Might is right. Shouting people down, that's kind of what we do. We shame people who don't see the world way we do. We humiliate those who disagree with us. We don't get mad. We get even, or maybe even a little more than even. We will erase you. We will eliminate. What's the word? It's cancel you.
Culture.
We will cancel you if you don't agree with us. That's all part of winning, and that's what the American way is. We have to win. When I went to Italy a couple years ago, it was funny. Our missionaries there, they said, you don't have to worry about, because I was told not to wear any logos with American stuff on it or whatever. So just in case, I don't know, terrorists or something. But when I got there, our missionary said, well, that's not a big deal. And I said, well, why? I said, well, they told us that this could happen. They go, people know you're American by the way you walk down the street. They said, if you notice, all the Italians are on the sidewalks and they're walking kind of close to the building. And when they walk in, you don't even really notice when they come in a room. But he said, you Americans, when you get here, you walk down the middle of the street or you walk down the middle of the sidewalk. And everybody knows when you walk into a room. See, as an American, we have this idea that we have weight. We have gravitas. I'm an American, and that means I'm a winner, right? I told you about the T-shirt that says "Back-to-back World Champions." Mm-hmm. That's the way we see ourselves. We have not lost a world war yet. There's a pride in becoming and being an American. I think that's a question you're going to ask: is what's the sin of America? And I would say it's pride. And it's a pride that's gone all the way back to the Revolutionary War. It's this idea that manifest destiny, that all of this is ours and we are going to make something out of it. I forgot what your question was now. I went down a path. What's the rest of it?
Well, I asked about our democratic republic.
Oh, okay.
In the Constitution and the Bible.
So here's the thing. So we have this society now that really is driven by pride. It's driven by individualism. It's driven by success and selfishness. That's what it is, an entitled culture. It reminds me of a lot of the book of Judges. And in the book of Judges, it said that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And that's really kind of where we are. Everybody is doing what's right in their own eyes. I like to read some broadly at times, and one of the books that I think we talked about me reading was Plato's Republic. Mm-hmm. And he talked about kind of the different levels of government. The highest form of government is really a monarchy where you have a benevolent king. And
that's mostly what I see as an example in the Bible.
In the Bible, right. Mm-hmm. You see that with David. You see that the kings, most of them were bad, some were good, but the idea was God is king and that he had a king over the nation. The next level would be kind of an aristocracy where not only you have a benevolent king, but you have some other rulers that are there, and so they kind of rule it together. And then it goes into an oligarchy where it's the land owners who kind of have the power. And then after that is democracy. So democracy is actually pretty far down on his list. Now, we have a republic, not really a democracy, but there's some similarities. Mm-hmm. And the problem in a democracy, which Plato said, is it's always going to turn into a dictatorship because people will always give up their freedoms and their rights for safety. They'll always do that. And so it's always going to kind of devolve into this other thing. And the other thing is you have competing visions of what's the right way to go, right? So in a democracy, if it's of the people, by the people, for the people, well, then the people make the decision on what we're going to do. There's 5 of us in this room. What are the chances that we will all 5 agree 100% on any 10 topics?
100?
0.
Okay.
Multiply that by 300 and whatever.
30 million.
30 million people. Sure. And all of a sudden you start to see we don't agree on anything. And so when our government is formed in this thing where it's based on opinion, and I live in a very selfish society, I'm always going to be looking out for what benefits me the most. I'm always going to be looking out for that. And generally what benefits me the most doesn't benefit you the most. And so we live in a society where one side wins and one side loses. And generally in that, there's both sides ultimately lose. So,
well, you talked about being a little boy.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up being a little boy in Truth, Justice, and the American Way. Superman, who has superpowers, so therefore
he is a superhero. Yes.
Okay. But going back to Truth, Justice, and the American Way, there's a lot. I grew up learning about the beginnings of the Revolutionary War, revolting from England, fighting for our rights, establishing the American experiment, as it's been called now. So if you go back to our country's roots, even back before 1776, when the Puritans came over, were they pure? And as they're Puritans, what about the founding fathers? I've always heard that they were godly men and wanted to use godly principles, biblical principles, to start our nation. I'm sure you can speak on that just a little bit.
A little bit. Yeah.
A little bit.
So Puritans and Pilgrims come over, first folks that come over from England. The Puritans were the ones who, their goal was to purify the Church of England. And when some of those reforms that they wanted to do within the Church of England didn't happen and they got kicked out, they left. The Pilgrims are more of the Congregationalists. They were outside. They weren't trying to reform the Church of England. They were trying to do a separate thing. Those are the two groups that ended up coming that we hear about, the Pilgrims and the Puritans. Now, along with them came a lot of riffraff. So there's, you have folks, and we've talked about this, almost any time there's been a missionary endeavor, anytime there's been, now the popular phrase is colonialism or whatever, most of those things were driven by the church sending out missionaries. They were sending out folks that were wanting to convert what they called the heathen to Christianity. And along with them came treasure hunters, came adventurers and all that. And so there may be some pure motives, but all of a sudden you've got a bunch of other stuff that gets mixed in with it. So with the Puritans and the Pilgrims, they came over because they're wanting religious freedom. They're wanting to be able to kind of worship God the way they see that they should. They're still considered themselves English citizens, but there's an ability to worship here that they couldn't back in England. With them, again, you have some other folks that have different ideas, but they're all kind of mixed together at the beginning. The Puritans and the Pilgrims, they kind of see America as this shining city on a hill. It's going to be the New Jerusalem. It's where they're going to set up a Christian society, and it's going to be, the kingdom of God on earth kind of deal. That's in the 1600s. By the time you get to the 1700s, those folks have had some impact, of course, on their kids and all that stuff. And you've had the first Great Awakening, and you actually had, I don't think the second Great Awakening happened yet, but it's sometime around there. And so you've got this religious kind of underpinnings to the nation, and there's a lot of Christian influence at that point. But then you start having the winds of revolution start to come. And at the same time, you've got revolution that's happening over in France. And the French Revolution and the American Revolution are kind of running on fairly parallel tracks, except the French Revolution, as they're going through it, they've decided it's an atheistic revolution. They're going to kick God out of the country. The God will have no place, and they end up making reason their God. That's going to be the highest thing. In the Americas, where we've got folks like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, who are in some ways very European. They're influenced by a guy named John Locke, who wrote books on democracy and liberty and those kind of things. And so there's some of his democratic ideas that they're holding on to, and they go, this seems like a good idea, a republic. Same time, you've got King George, who's wanting to do his thing with tea and tax and all those things. It's interesting when you read the Declaration of Independence, the majority of it is our list of grievances of why we're revolting against Britain. If you read those lists of grievances, I can't tell you one of them that's a biblical reason to revolt. I can't give you one. Mostly we just don't like somebody else telling us what to do. That whole root of Americanism, where we're right and you're wrong, that's kind of goes all the way back to then. And so these folks, and at that time, most of your churches, most of your pastors are proclaiming revolution from their pulpits. And so from the very beginnings, while I wouldn't say it's a Christian nation, I would say that the church and state get wrapped around each other pretty tightly from the very beginning, because the pulpit is where revolution is proclaimed from. And a lot of folks are saying we need to throw off the shackles of the English, of the king. And so we have a revolution, and I'm trying to think where else I was going. What was the other question there?
Well, I think I asked about the founding fathers. Were they Christian?
Were they
then?
Christian?
You started talking about Thomas Jefferson.
So Thomas Jefferson actually had his own version of the Bible. He took out most of the miracles of Jesus because he didn't believe those happened. Benjamin Franklin, no. So all of these guys are deists, at least. They believe in a God. Most of them, their version of God is a God who created the world, and he created the laws by which the world would work, and then he walked away and left the world to run on its own.
And that's where those guys come in with their ideas in order to make things work.
Yeah. And so really it's up to us then to make things happen, because God isn't the one to do it. We're the one to do it. So we roll up our shirt sleeves, we get to work, and we make things happen. And so you have a Christian kind of influence even in that time. But if you read through the founding documents, you read through the Constitution, even the Declaration of Independence, they're not biblical documents. They're not really biblical ideas in there. There's a mention of, again, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness being endowed by our Creator, so the idea of a Creator and providence and those kind of things, but there's nothing Christian about him. And then when you get to the Constitution, there's really nothing Christian about that. In fact, when you inaugurate a president, they don't even have to swear on a Bible. They don't have to be Christian. They don't have to swear to any kind of deity. It's just they need to swear that they will uphold these things. And so I would say from the beginning, it hasn't been. It's been influenced by Christianity, but it's not a Christian nation.
That brings us to the end of part 2 for our series, but we do have a part 3, so I invite you back next week for part 3.